I started my night patrol the same way I always do. Flashlight clipped to the vest, radio on low, Koda pacing a half step ahead of me. The forest around Zaleski was quiet in that steady, dependable way it gets after sunset. No wind tonight, just the crunch of gravel under my boots and the soft jingle of Koda's collar as we took the outer loop near the old Moonville Trail. Nothing unusual. Nothing that should have made me pause. It felt like a routine shift, the kind where you can almost move on autopilot and trust the woods to behave. The first call came in while we were passing the ridge. A group of 3 hikers said they'd heard an old mining alarm blaring somewhere near the tree line. A long, metallic howl, the kind they used decades ago when the shafts were still open. I marked the location and kept moving. Before I even reached the fork, another call cut through the radio. This time, 2 campers farther down the same slope reported something completely different. A woman crying for help. Same spot, same timestamp, totally different world. I asked a few questions, tried to pin them down on what they meant by crying, but they sounded shaken enough that I told them to stay put and let me check it out. So I did. I walked the exact stretch both groups described, and I found nothing. No dropped gear, no footprints that didn't belong, not even a shift in the air. The place was bare, except for the usual scattered brush and the smell of damp leaves. I stood there a moment, listening. Koda sniffed at the dirt, tail low, waiting for some cue I didn't have. I was about to call it a false alarm when my radio cracked hard in my ear. One sharp metallic burst. Then, the same burst again, just a fraction off, like an echo trying to catch up with itself. I froze. The radio went silent right after, as if it hadn't misbehaved at all. That's when Koda stiffened beside me, his ears pushed forward. He let out a low, careful growl at the empty dark between 2 pines. And the forest, it just folded into this strange micro-silence. No insects, no rustling, no distant water flow from the creek. It felt like someone pressed a mute button on the whole landscape. I waited for something else to happen, something obvious, something physical. Nothing came. After a minute, the normal sounds slid back in, thin and awkward, like they were late to their own performance. I turned around and retraced my steps toward the main trail. Same route, same ground. But when my flashlight skimmed across the mud, my stomach dipped. My footprints dragged slightly sideways. Not the fresh ones. All of them. Every step I'd taken leaned a few degrees off the line, like I'd been drifting without noticing. Just a small misalignment. Just enough to make me stop. Just enough to stay with me long after we left that stretch of woods behind. Most mornings in Zaleski State Forest, out here in southeast Ohio, start the same way. Early, quiet, colder than it should be. I get the coffee going on the station's old burner, check the board for trail issues, and glance over whatever list Lynn has taped to the cabinet. Then I'm out the door before sunrise. Trail inspections, clearing fallen branches, replacing vandalized signs, helping day hikers who refuse to admit they're lost. Sometimes I'm pulling kids back onto the trail. Sometimes it's grown adults who only stepped away for a second. Koda sticks close for all of it, steady, alert, always scanning the edges of the woods like the trees are whispering something to him. Mara joined our team 2 weeks ago. Too much energy for a place that relies on patience and quiet, but she's sharp. She notices bent brush before I do. Tracks I'd normally have to kneel down to confirm. She fires off questions nonstop, most of them good, but she pushes too far sometimes. I warn her to be careful. She gives me that stubborn half smile that basically means she won't be. Lynn is the complete opposite. 8 years running the station, calm voice, even tone, everything by the book. She doesn't believe in anything she can't log, document, or tape to a clipboard. In her mind, the world works best when it stays organized. I don't blame her. But out here, I trust Koda more than routine. The first strange moment of the week came from Rafi. He's a regular camper, respectful, keeps his site clean, no drama. He jogged up to me near the South Ridge and said he heard a long metallic drone near the old mine shafts. I asked, "Metallic how?" He rubbed his palms nervously. Like a speaker dragging on gravel, low, continuous, just wrong. I followed him to the spot. Nothing there, just leaves and old dirt, no old equipment, no metal scraps, no signs of anything echoing. He apologized for pulling me out of my route, but I logged the report anyway. Habit more than concern. The next couple of days brought small shifts, none of them threatening, just strange enough to make me pause. The West Loop Trail, a path I could walk blind, felt longer than usual, not dramatically, just enough that my steps didn't land where I expected. I blamed it on being tired. Then Lynn radioed me about checking a fire pit at campsite 12. Her transmission came through twice. Same tone, same cadence, just slightly offset. I asked her later, "Did you send that twice?" She shook her head. "Nope, radio must have glitched." Clear sky. No storm systems, no solar interference. Still didn't sit right. Koda started his own pattern. He'd slow down on the trail, stare hard at empty forest, and growl under his breath. Nothing moved when I looked. No deer, no birds, no shifting branches. But he'd keep growling until I nudged him forward. Jimmy showed up on the third afternoon. He's one of those campers who doesn't make noise, reads, hikes, eats simple meals, never complains. He waited until I finished checking the fire ring, then stepped up beside me. His voice was low. I saw something tall between the trees. I asked him what he meant. He swallowed once, eyes fixed on the ground. It didn't move, not even a little. It just stood there, like it wasn't supposed to be in the same world as the rest of us. He kept trying to explain, but couldn't put the feeling into words. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't imagining things. He just looked misaligned, like whatever he saw nudged something inside him sideways. I told him I'd take a look later. He nodded and walked off, but the discomfort stayed with him. I could see it in how tightly he held his water bottle. I wrote everything down when I got back to the station, not because I believed anything was happening, but because ignoring it felt wrong. The forest had a slight tilt to it that week, like a painting knocked 1 degree off center, not dangerous, not dramatic, just off. I'd walk a ridge and think the slope looked unfamiliar, or the sound of distant water would cut sooner than it should, or Koda would tense up at nothing. Fall likes to do that, change the air, push animals around, twist familiar sounds. But none of those explanations sat well. The moment that stuck the hardest came near sunset. Mara had clocked out, and Lynn was closing the office. I was on the last stretch of the outer trail when a thin metallic hum settled between 2 tall treetops, not loud, not sharp. Just a steady vibration, like the air itself was being tuned. I raised my flashlight and stepped closer. The sound cut instantly, clean, sharp, like a switch thrown off. Koda didn't move, not right away. He locked his body toward the same space between the trees, ears stiff, tail low. I tugged gently at his collar. No reaction. His eyes didn't blink. He just stared at the space where the tone had been, as if waiting for it to return. And for the first time all week, something pressed down in my chest, nothing huge, nothing dramatic, just a quiet, unmistakable sense that the forest was no longer sitting the way it used to. The woods were familiar, but they weren't aligning right anymore. The next few days came with a noticeable shift in mood across the forest, like Zaleski had quietly agreed to behave strangely, and the rest of us were just catching up. Reports started drifting into the station faster than Lynn could organize them. Campers knocking on the window before sunrise, hikers calling from the trails with shaky voices. None of them agreed on details, but they all agreed on one thing. The sounds were getting worse. A woman swore she heard a little girl crying somewhere off the Moonville path, said she followed the sound until it suddenly stopped and the woods went quiet in that uncomfortable way, like the air refused to move. A group of college kids reported what they thought was a broken PA system echoing through the trees, static bursts, garbled syllables, maybe the word stop somewhere in the noise. Another hiker said he heard his brother calling his name, even though his brother was in Cincinnati that day. All the reports pointed to the same direction, back toward the abandoned mining trails. Mara and I started pinning everything on the big laminated map Lynn keeps over her desk. She color-coded every dot because she likes order, and Mara triple-checked the coordinates because she doesn't trust phone GPS. We added each incident one by one, and after the fifth or sixth cluster, I leaned closer. The pattern wasn't random. The reports weren't scattered. They formed a rough, almost perfect ring around the mining area, like everything strange was orbiting something in the center. Mara looked at the map, then at me. She asked, "Is that normal?" I shook my head. No, not even a little. When Raffi came back, he didn't have another story. He had a recording. He walked straight up to me at the edge of the trail, hand shaking as he held out his phone. "Just listen," he said. The audio was only 8 seconds long, but it felt longer. A thin drone rose from silence, stretching upward like metal being pulled until it thins to a wire. It didn't sound like a machine. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like fear, twisted and converted into something mechanical, a tone-shaped emotion. I felt my teeth hurt by the 3rd second. When the recording cut off, Raffi stared at the ground like he didn't want to know what he'd captured. I tried keeping things rational, but the glitches didn't stay small. My GPS began bouncing backward while I walked forward, as if the device swore I'd returned to places I hadn't seen in hours. My footsteps echoed in the wrong direction, behind me when I moved ahead of me when I stopped. Koda snarled at empty sections of forest, growls so low I felt them in my rib cage. Every now and then, the entire soundscape around us would just flatten. No wind, no insects, no water, no birds. The hum of the world simply vanished. I'd wait for it to come back, breathing slow, pretending it didn't feel like the woods were holding their breath with me. Jimmy returned on the 4th afternoon, and this time he didn't approach slowly. He burst through the station door with wide eyes and shaking hands. Lynn nearly jumped out of her chair. He kept repeating the same line until he caught his breath. "I saw it again," he said. "I saw it, between 2 dead trees." I asked him what he meant by it, and he squeezed the bridge of his nose like trying to force the memory into shape. It was tall, taller than any guy I've ever seen, and it didn't move. Not at all. But I think... He swallowed. I think it knew I was there. He refused to go back out that day. Lynn let him stay in the station until a friend picked him up, and even then Jimmy kept glancing at the tree line like he expected the thing to appear, not walking toward him, but simply standing somewhere it shouldn't. Later that evening, Lynn called me over the radio. Her tone wasn't calm this time. "Simon, we've got something new. 2 hikers reported a dead silent zone about 20 meters wide near the old shaft markers. A silent zone, not just quiet. Dead silent. Even the hikers' voices felt muffled to themselves." I went to check it out. Mara wanted to come, but Lynn told her to stay inside and finish the reports. The sky was slipping into late afternoon, shadows long enough to tangle together. Koda kept pulling on the leash, not forward or backward, but sideways, like he wanted to skirt the area entirely. The silent zone was real. The moment I stepped in, the world folded inward. Not a single sound broke through, not even the crunch of my own boots. I pulled out the handheld anemometer we use to measure wind speed. The device spun twice, glitched, and froze. No wind reading, no motion, nothing. My breathing felt heavier just standing there, as if the air had thickened. When I stepped back out, everything snapped back at once. Wind through the leaves, distant birds, the rhythmic click of Koda's collar. I walked the perimeter twice. No natural explanation made sense. The next morning, Mara insisted on going deeper into the mining area with me. She said the data cluster wasn't random, that it lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. So we packed extra lights and followed the old trails inward. Rusted beams, broken stone markers, half-buried cables. The mines were shut down decades ago, and most of the equipment had been hauled out or fenced off. The place smelled like stale minerals and lingering cold. We found something near an old warning post. A piece of audio cable snapped clean in half, not rusted, not frayed, freshly broken. Mara crouched beside it and touched the metal with a gloved hand. She said, "This wasn't weather damage." I nodded. Something pulled it. We didn't say what we were both thinking, that nothing natural would bother with a cable this old. Nothing normal would have a reason to break it recently. As we continued deeper, that uneasy pattern from the reports began to form in my own head. Whatever people were seeing or hearing was never moving. Not once. Every description pointed to stillness, a shape in the corner of the eye, a presence between two trees, something appearing closer but never while being watched, movement without motion, something that only existed at the edge of perception. The air thickened again near the far ridge. I didn't notice at first. I was too focused on an old boundary sign, until Koda's leash jerked hard enough to pull me backward. I stumbled, caught my balance, and dropped my flashlight. The beam rolled forward into a patch of perfectly still air, no leaf movement, no insect noise. The second silent zone. Koda braced his paws, teeth bared, pulling me away with all the muscle he had. A low pressure hummed through my skull, subtle but unmistakable, like a suppressed vibration pushing against my eardrums. Not loud, not painful, but wrong. My instincts screamed louder than any alarm system ever could. We backed out slowly. The air returned, sound returned, the world returned. But something had shifted, something fundamental. The forest wasn't just acting strange. It wasn't misaligned or confused. It was behaving according to rules I didn't understand, rules it had never shown us before. And for the first time since taking the job, I felt like I wasn't patrolling in the woods. I was patrolling on top of something deeper, something listening, something adjusting, something waiting for the next misstep. The storm rolled in fast, too fast for the season, like the clouds had been waiting above the canopy for a cue. By the time I made it back to the station, thunder was already crawling across the sky in long, shaking pulses. Rain hammered the windows, wind bent the treetops sideways. The whole world felt unbalanced. Lynn's voice cracked through the radio before I even hung my jacket. "Simon, you need to get back out there. 2 campers haven't returned to their site. Last known location was near the old mining trails. 2 missing. In this weather." My stomach sank. I clipped my light, grabbed my pack, and whistled for Koda. Mara was already at the door with her gear. She didn't ask permission. She just nodded once, like she understood everything without a word. We headed into the forest with rain slashing sideways, soaking us faster than we could move. The trails looked wrong from the first step, not washed out or muddy, but misaligned. Landmarks weren't where they should have been. Fallen logs looked farther apart than usual. The path curved in ways it never had before. I kept blinking, trying to force my memory to match the terrain, but the terrain refused to agree. Mara shined her light on a ridge and frowned. "This isn't where the ridge usually is, right?" "No," I said, "it's not." The storm didn't just distort sound, it distorted the whole forest. We met Raffi at the South Fork. He'd insisted on helping search even though he looked exhausted. His jacket was half-zipped, mud streaked his boots, but he was determined. He said, "I saw the campers heading this way. I can help. Just tell me where to look." Before I could answer, Raffi staggered sideways like the ground tilted beneath him. He clutched his head, dropped to his knees, and let out a rough, broken groan. Koda barked sharply, circling him. Blood trickled from Raffi's right ear. My breath caught. Low-frequency pressure, inner ear damage, the kind you get when air vibrates at a pitch nature doesn't usually allow. Mara knelt beside him. "Raffi, can you hear me?" He shook his head weakly. "It's too loud. It's inside my skull." But the forest was silent except for the storm. I helped him to his feet, but he couldn't stay with us. We guided him back along the main trail until he could make it to the station. He kept muttering under his breath the whole way, words I couldn't make out, like he was arguing with something no one else could hear. Mara and I pushed deeper in. The rain softened for a moment, falling in strange stops and starts. Heavy 1 second, light the next, like the storm was adjusting itself. The trees swayed, but the air around us felt too still. My flashlight beam jittered with every step. Koda's growls came more often now, directed at places where nothing moved. We found Jimmy near the remnants of an old fire road, standing inside a silent zone. His face was pale, his eyes were glassy. He didn't blink when we approached. Mara waved her hand in front of him. "Jimmy? Hey, Jimmy?" Nothing. He didn't flinch. I stepped closer and saw it, the same dense, suffocating stillness that hung inside the previous silent zone. Sound didn't just die here, it dissolved. Even the rain muted as it crossed the boundary, like each drop was swallowed mid-air. Jimmy finally spoke, but his voice didn't sound like his own. "It's all one note," he swallowed. "Everything's the same pitch. I can't hear anything else." Koda barked once, sharply, as if trying to cut through whatever held Jimmy in place. We pulled him out of the zone step by step. When he crossed the edge, the forest's real sound snapped back around us. He gasped like someone had freed him from underwater. His hands trembled. He wouldn't let go of my sleeve. Before we could move, lightning lit the ridge, and that's when I saw it. A silhouette, tall, thin, framed between two skeletal trees. It didn't move, didn't sway, didn't breathe. It was simply there, colorless against the dark. When I blinked, the body stayed in place, but the shadow shifted slightly left, like two different images were fighting over which one was real. The air pressure dropped hard enough to make my ears pop. Mara whispered, "Do you see?" "Yeah," I said, and the moment the word left my mouth, the forest erupted, not physically, audibly. The soundscape shattered into overlapping layers, each one wrong in a different direction. Mara flinched back. I can hear myself talking." Her words repeated 2 seconds behind her own voice, ghosting into the air like an echo that wasn't tied to anything real. Raffi's voice crackled through my radio, even though he was miles away. "Help me, come closer. Please don't leave me out here." But it sounded too desperate, too stretched, too raw. Not human begging. Human emotions scraped thin. Koda spun in frenzied circles, whining, barking, then backing up as if something invisible pressed against him. His claws dug into the dirt. And I heard something else. Something I'd never forget. My own fear. Not the storm. Not the forest. Not someone else's voice. It was my fear, bent through metal, stretched, twisted, brought into the world as a tone that vibrated straight through my bones. It sounded like steel being pulled apart, under strain, like something inside me was being turned into noise. The chase wasn't physical. It wasn't even directional. The world bent around us. Paths doubled. 2 identical clearings appeared where there should have been one. Trees repeated in perfect patterns, like the forest was copying and pasting itself. Every time we moved, the terrain shifted. Not drastically, subtly, sickeningly, like walking through a reflection that didn't want to stay still. Mara grabbed my arm. "Simon, where do we go?" I didn't know. The forest wasn't guiding us anymore. It was herding us. Koda lunged forward, pulling us away from a ridge that suddenly sloped the wrong way. I followed him. I trusted him more than anything else in that moment. We stumbled through the noise until the old abandoned cabin came into view, half swallowed by undergrowth. The windows were cracked, the door hung crooked. But it was shelter. A barrier, a place where the forest couldn't rearrange the ground under our feet. We shoved the door open and stumbled inside. Rain beat the rooftop in sharp bursts. The wind howled outside, but the deeper noises, the warped ones, stayed out for a moment, circling like coyotes looking for a weak spot. Mara leaned against the wall, panting. She whispered, "It doesn't move when we look at it." The room felt colder after she said it. Koda stood at the door, ears back, tail low, watching the gap between the trees. I followed his gaze. The silhouette stood at the edge of the clearing, still, patient, waiting. It blended into the woods so well that my eyes kept losing it and finding it again. Every time I blinked, it looked slightly repositioned, not closer, not farther, just different. We couldn't stay here. The cabin wouldn't hold if the forest itself wanted us. I whispered, "We're leaving on my count. Stay close. Don't look away from each other." Mara nodded. Jimmy didn't. He stared blankly at the floor, trembling. I took his arm. We pushed through the door and into the storm, and the forest moved with us. Silent zones blinked in and out like holes opening in the air. The ground shifted underfoot. The trees bent just enough to distort direction without snapping. It felt like running through a maze that was being drawn and erased in real time. Koda yanked hard left, dragging me away from a new silent zone forming faster than I could see it. The air inside it shimmered in a way that made my eyes ache. Mara nearly slipped into it before I pulled her back. Thunder cracked overhead. For a split second, the entire forest lit up. I turned. The creature was closer, not walking, not stepping, just existing where it hadn't been a moment earlier. Its height was wrong. Its posture was wrong. Its presence bent the rain around it. Koda barked with a panic I'd never heard before. We ran. The storm surged behind us as we fought toward the outer path, the one stretch of terrain the forest hadn't rewritten. The noise thinned, the tones faded. The air stopped vibrating against my skull. When we finally broke through the last line of trees, the pressure lifted completely. It felt like stepping out of a dream you didn't know you were having. We didn't stop moving until we reached the trailhead. Only then did I risk turning around. Nothing stood at the tree line, but the forest felt alive, breathing, listening, and whatever was inside it didn't feel finished with us. We didn't speak for a long time after reaching the trailhead. The rain softened to a steady patter, dripping from our clothes in cold streaks. Every one of us looked like we'd been scraped out of the forest instead of rescued from it. Jimmy trembled beside Mara. Koda pressed tight against my leg, silent except for a low rumble buried somewhere deep in his chest. None of us dared look back toward the trees. Eventually, when the storm thinned enough for our radios to work again, Lynn's voice broke through with a burst of static. She kept asking where we were, why the locators showed our signals spinning in circles. I told her we were heading in, told her we were safe. I didn't believe it yet. Back at the station, the lights felt too bright and the air felt too normal. like the walls weren't allowed to hold the things we'd seen outside. Mara wrapped a blanket around Jimmy while Lynn checked him for injuries. His skin was cold, his eyes unfocused. Every few seconds he'd flinch, like startled by something no one else could sense. I crouched beside him. "Jimmy, you hear me?" He nodded slowly, but his voice cracked. "It's all one note, everything, one tone. I can't separate anything out. One tone." The silent zones hadn't just stolen sound, they'd rewritten it inside his head. His world had collapsed into a single frequency. Mara lowered her eyes. "I heard myself," she whispered. "When it started, that voice calling out, it wasn't someone else, it was me." I looked at her. She swallowed hard. 2 seconds delayed. I said something I never actually said, and then I heard myself answering it. She hugged her arms tight around her chest as if holding herself in place. Koda let out another low, rumbling growl, but it wasn't directed at anyone. It was directed at the floor, at the air, at whatever pitch the creature had left inside him. He tried to bark once, just once. Nothing came out, just that small, trembling rumble again. That's all he had now. I realized then that none of their experiences were separate. The forest hadn't broken 3 different people in 3 different ways. It had broken them the same way, just filtered through different emotions. Jimmy had fear, Mara had doubt, Koda had instinct, and each one of them heard themselves reflected back. The thought tightened something behind my ribs, something I'd been trying not to acknowledge since the first distorted tone hit my ears. The creature wasn't mimicking us. It wasn't copying our voices or borrowing random sounds. It was relaying us, amplifying the things we didn't want to hear. Every victim had described something different, but the pattern wasn't in the sound. It was in the person. I leaned against the table to steady myself. "It's not impersonating anyone," I said quietly. "It's echoing what we're already feeling." Mara looked up. "What do you mean?" "Raffi heard panic, Jimmy heard fear, you heard yourself, and the sound I heard..." I exhaled slowly. It was my own fear, turned into metal. Lynn crossed her arms tightly, her face pale in a way I'd never seen. "So you're saying this thing reads emotion?" "No," I said. "It translates it. It makes it audible." No one spoke. The storm outside moved farther north, rattling the windows as it left. It sounded like the forest clearing its throat. I moved to the whiteboard, ignoring the ache in my legs, and circled the map we'd marked earlier. The ring of incidents, the perfect arc around the mining trails, every point tracing the same invisible boundary. "It never appears in the center," I said. "It always stays in the ring." Mara whispered, "Like it's orbiting something." "No, more like monitoring something." But I didn't want to say that aloud. While we pieced the reports together, Jimmy finally drifted into a shaky sleep on the bench. His breathing steadied, his hands uncurled. For the first time since we found him, he looked almost human again. I turned away from him and stared at the map. And that's when the final part clicked. The creature didn't move. Not when seen. Not when watched. Not when someone's eyes were fixed on the space it occupied. Every sighting had the same structure, a still frame, a frozen posture. A silhouette that only changed when the witness blinked or looked away. I replayed the storm in my mind, the lightning flash, the figure between the trees, how it appeared closer, not because it walked, but because I stopped seeing it for half a second. My breath slowed. "It only shifts when no one's looking at it," I said. The sentence felt heavy in the air. "It's not hunting, it's listening, adjusting, tuning itself to what it hears." Mara rubbed her arms. "Listening for what?" I looked at her. "Whatever we try to hide." A long silence followed. the kind that creaks inside your bones. The forest had been echoing our emotions back at us, building itself around the strongest things we'd tried to ignore. It wasn't chasing us with teeth or claws. It was resonating us into place, a tuning fork, a mirror, a relay. And if it only shifted when unobserved, we weren't powerless. "Okay," I said. "If we have to go back out there, and we might, there's one thing we can use." Mara straightened, exhausted but alert. "What?" "Sight." I pointed at the map. "If we keep each other in view, it can't reposition. It only moves in the blind spot." Lynn frowned. "You're guessing." "I am." I didn't try to soften it. "But I haven't been wrong about the patterns yet." Another deep rumbling growl came from Koda's throat. He was staring toward the dark window, staring at the pitch outside as if he could feel it humming. We didn't have a choice. We formed up at the edge of the trail. Me in front, Mara at my back, Jimmy between us, and Koda moving in a tight curve around our legs. The sky was still bruised with storm clouds, but the rain had thinned to a cold mist. "Ugh," I spoke without turning. "No one breaks sight. If you turn, you tell us first. If you blink, blink quick." Mara nodded. "Got it," Jimmy whispered. "I'll try." We walked in a slow outward spiral, marking every shift in air pressure, every wrong vibration. The forest resisted us. Paths wavered, light bent in small, nauseating angles. Twice we stepped around new silent zones forming like pits in the ground. But the creature didn't appear. It didn't shift. It didn't lean into view. We were watching, and that forced it still. When we reached the last curve of the ring, the boundary where all reports had stopped, something changed. A tone rose from the woods, not loud, not aggressive, just intimate. A single metallic breath, soft, drawn out, vibrating exactly in sync with the panic I was trying to push down. Not Mara's fear, not Jimmy's. Not Koda's, mine. My chest tightened, my vision dipped, like something inside the woods was holding a mirror to my pulse and playing it back to me as sound. Mara whispered, "Simon." "Is that?" "Yeah," my voice cracked. "That one's mine." The tone swelled, then faded into a thin thread of resonance before dissolving into the wind. And just like that, the forest let go of us. The trees straightened, the ground aligned, the air became breathable again. We stepped across the final boundary, out of the ring, out of its influence, and the pressure in my skull vanished so quickly my knees almost buckled. We kept moving until the trail behind us looked normal, until the sounds of the woods blended into something familiar again. Only then did Jimmy stop trembling. Only then did Koda stop growling. Only then did Mara let out a breath she'd been holding for minutes. But I didn't exhale, because deep in my chest, in a place I didn't have a name for, something still vibrated, something still echoed, something was still listening. And for the first time since this began, I felt certain. It knew me now. It understood exactly which tone belonged to me, and I wasn't sure it intended to give it back. Back at the station, the air felt too still for a place that was supposed to be safe. The lights hummed faintly overhead, steady and normal, but every vibration in the building felt sharper, like the world was tuned one frequency higher than usual. Koda pushed against my leg the moment we stepped inside and stayed there, trembling with each breath. He hadn't barked since the forest. I wasn't sure he ever would again. Lynn looked exhausted. She tried to hide it, but her eyes kept darting to the windows, checking for something she couldn't name. She handed us towels, hot drinks, anything she could physically hold. It was her way of pretending things were still in her control. When she glanced at the radio logs, her face tightened. "Simon, these transmissions from earlier tonight, they're doubled." She tapped the screen. It shows I spoke twice, but I didn't. I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. Mara sat on the bench with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the floor like it might open and swallow her. She kept twisting the drawstring of her hoodie between her fingers. "I can't do silence," she murmured. "Not right now." She reached over and turned on the station radio just to fill the room with something. Static, low chatter, emergency weather notices, anything not shaped like the tones we'd heard out there. Jimmy rested on the cot near the heater. His breathing finally evened out, but every time a truck passed on the distant road outside, his whole body tensed like he expected the sound to split open into that single, horrible frequency again. He didn't speak. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. But the fear in his eyes was steady, like he was still seeing the world through one vibrating thread. Raffi sent a text from the clinic saying he was stable. "Just dizzy," he wrote, "just nauseous." But the doctor said his inner ear was swollen, irritated by pressure changes that didn't match the storm outside. He didn't remember collapsing. He didn't remember hearing anything wrong, only that he felt something pulling him sideways into a kind of emptiness. I stepped outside for air. The storm had passed, leaving the forest soaked and dark, heavy with the smell of wet bark and overturned soil. The trees stood quietly, too quietly, as if waiting for a cue to move again. I walked the first stretch of the trail out of habit, trying to slow my breathing. Koda followed, nudging my hand every few steps. After a minute, I stopped. There, beneath the fresh mud, were my own footprints from earlier. All of them drifted slightly to the side. All of them leaned off-center, matching the same misalignment from the first night. I knelt beside them, feeling the weight of the forest pressing against the back of my neck. Maybe it was just water runoff. Maybe the storm had dragged the soil. But the shift was too clean, too consistent, too familiar. A faint hum rose behind me, soft, metallic, drawn out like a breath held too long, not loud, not close, just present. Koda froze first. He turned toward the tree line, ears pinned back, a low growl trembling through his chest. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Somewhere in the dark, the forest exhaled a tone that matched the exact cadence of my own heartbeat, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty it hadn't let us go.